is, you know, and you're probably aware that DOD does like a workforce, you know, like gender issue type survey.
Yeah.
With the, you know, yeah. But
Yeah.
not the Coast Guard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the Coast Guard told us they have to pay for that data to be extracted. Like if they want to add anything on or take anything out of that survey. Yeah.
They have to pay for it.
They have to pay for it.
Is it a third party or who does the?
It's an organization with that does, there's two organizations. I'm not sure who it is, the, you know, Defense, Human Resource Activity, which oversees a bunch of surveying efforts. They have a new, it used to be called Office of People and Cities, it just changed names, so I don't know what the latest name. But anyway, the point is anything that gets moved internal to DOD will need you know, it was part of Department of Transportation, and they got, you know, it's the ordinance.
That's what I always hear is an iteration of that word, so or that description. They're like started as you can see.
We found it. Right. I brought Haley and Damien.
Here, I can move down one and sit next to them.
Did you say Mary Bennett?
Yeah, she's on the second panel
Okay. In this.
in the same building.
Okay.
But for energy and commerce.
Okay. Andrew testified at Energy and Commerce yesterday.
His went really good. He got like over 20 questions.
Yeah. No, it was great. Yeah.
Where did you stay? Where did you stay? Oh, nice. He stayed behind.
I know. He was complaining about it. Well, thank you. I've been here since
Oh, that's right.
Oh, so you got in.
I moved hotels. Yeah, I was able to get to them.
Any last minute issues?
Indeed.
Which is daunting, you know, about the health, so.
That's how long I've been at GAO. It feels forever to me. So for you to say just.
We come in with the numbers right on time. Yeah. No, I was curious about that too. We'll see. So that's nice.
Fill rooms.
Oh, so much better than Zoom. Oh my goodness.
As something as specific as we hope, you know, what our problems are.
Welcome. That's why.
Hi, I'm Beth Hatch.
really
Yeah, thanks for coming too. Cinda.
Right, exactly. Trying to get in their heads. I remember interacting with her a lot. Okay. Loves her work.
Are you offering?
Yeah, so our researchers will regularly travel to, they'll do similar, they'll do interviews as part of their research. And then they will do some exhibits and stuff like that. But some of it, it just depends on the project, you know. And then we have them traveling from, in this case, Santa Monica to support. Beth tells me she thinks cons all the time. She was here.
Did you come in earlier this week?
I came in yesterday.
Okay.
You know, it's like, you probably feel this too. Sometimes it just feels like a long commute because you do
Yeah.
it so often. You got the whole thing down to, you know, throat. So
Yeah. Yep. It's off Denise here. Pop in, pop out.
yeah, I'm leaving tonight.
Are you? I have a we call them like the morning and the afternoon flight to Seattle, but I have the morning flight tomorrow. But assuming we wrap up by noon, I'm gonna try and get on the afternoon flight.
I know like when we're here, it's always like how much can I cram in, you know, the least amount of time, you know, and it's
Yeah.
always that like who can I, you know, all the
Yeah.
meetings and
Yeah.
head on a swim.
Yep. Yep. No, for sure. We had some leadership meetings in Chicago last week, and so I've been here since Monday.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no
Just
wonder
stayed
you
over
want to
the
get,
weekend.
yeah.
And so
You're ready.
Ready? Was that Matt who came over? The
Yeah,
gentleman with
yeah.
your tie? Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, so what did you do over the week? You mean you have friends here?
I do. Yeah. Did some tourist stuff.
It's fun.
Yeah. Don't often get an opportunity because I'm
isn't
so
that funny?
like
Focus.
so
Yeah,
tight.
isn't it the truth? Like for all the times I've been here, like
Yeah.
people, oh, have you been? It's like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah, I went over to like Eastern Market, you know, which is only on the weekends, and so
Yeah,
like never, and
expensive.
it's
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in like 15 years. I was like, oh, this is enormous.
Yeah.
It's like really cool.
And you know, of course, weather couldn't be better, right?
Mhm.
It's just, you know, before it gets nasty.
Especially compared to Seattle. Appreciate some sunshine.
Yeah, it's right from that area. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
not that you get used to it, but
Yeah, that's not so terrible, but
nonetheless, yeah. Yeah, we're pretty spoiled down south. But we've had our share of rain, but I know we can't complain. You're not allowed to complain about
that's
rain.
right. No,
You're not allowed.
no, nobody from that area. Not to me anyway. have not yet been there, so, yeah, absolutely. I anticipate that in our future.
These are majority staff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about exactly, but I was just
Okay, okay. Okay.
Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation will come to order. I ask unanimous consent as chairman to be authorized to declare a recess at any time during the hearing without objection. Show that done. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to ask questions and be a part of the committee. Without objection, show that ordered. As a reminder, if members insert a document in the record, please email it to the T&I committee. So, challenges in the United States Coast Guard. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses on the what is driving the manpower shortage in the United States Coast Guard and the United States Merchant Marine, and what can be done to address those shortages. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, Vice Admiral Pat Thomas, with Commandant for Mission Support, United States Coast Guard, Rear Admiral Ann Phillips, Administrator for the United States Maritime Administration, Heather McLeod, Director of Homeland Security and Justice for the United States Government Accountability Office, and Beth Ash, is it Ash?
Yes, sir.
Senior Economist at the Randall Corporation. Coast Guard is currently authorized for an active duty strength of 44,500 men and women, but in operating with a shortfall of approximately 4,800 members across the workforce. Despite the increasing mission demands, the Coast Guard, like other services, have faced limited growth in the ranks and projected to see the personnel deficit grow in the coming years. To help reverse those trends, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2023 was reported from the committee last month, with authorizations of $12 million to fund additional recruiting personnel and offices on the Coast Guard Recruiting Command, and $9 million to enhance Coast Guard recruiting capabilities. I understand the Coast Guard intends to implement a multi-tiered strategy to address these challenges that include relaxing certain requirements to expand the pool of qualified candidates, as well as adjusting personal policies, including related to personal leave and promotions to retain existing personnel. Look forward to hearing more about those efforts and how they're working. As experience challenges in Coast Guard recruiting and retention, we also, as we experience those, we also face a shortfall in our civilian merchant marine force. In 2017, it's estimated that the United States Merchant Marines will face a shortfall of 1,800 qualified licensed and unlicensed mariners needed in the event of a full mobilization to operate SULEFT assets. Merit has since indicated that the shortage will likely grow. In fiscal year 2023, National Defense Authorization Act directed the Department of Transportation, in consultation with the Coast Guard and with the United States Transportation Command, to develop a national maritime strategy that promotes the domestic maritime industry's ability to meet national security and economic needs. To further bolster these efforts, the committee included in the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2023 provisions that reduce bureaucratic delays and mariners' barriers to Americans seeking a seagoing career. Additionally, we authorized $11 million to upgrade the Coast Guard's IT infrastructure for the Coast Guard's Merchant Marine licensing and documentation system that was established in early 1990s and has significant limitations. Look forward to hearing from you on what other ways we can support your efforts. Thank you for participating today. I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Larson. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I always forget how nice Salud Carvajal is to give me the opportunity to speak before him. I appreciate that.
He is my higher ranking.
Thank you, Chair, for calling today's hearing. I apologize. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so I'm giving you my best movie voiceover voice this morning. The U.S. Coast Guard and the civilian U.S. Merchant Marine are facing a unique challenge with the booming economy and historically low unemployment rates. They're having a hard time attracting new individuals to service. For the Coast Guard, it often prides itself on its ability to do more with less. They're a fraction of the size and budget of other services, yet significantly have a wider mission set, and being semper paratus with insufficient resources is not sustainable. The Coast Guard is currently operating with a shortfall of more than 4,500 service members. To address this problem, the service is rethinking recruiting by hiring more recruiters, expanding the JROTC program, providing referral incentives, and deploying targeted advertising. Thank you, Salud. The Coast Guard offers unique experiences and opportunities to its service members. During an average day, the Coast Guard will conduct 109 search and rescues, launch 164 aircraft missions, seize 475 pounds of illegal drugs, respond to 20 oil or hazardous chemical spills, and service 135 aids to navigation. A career in the Coast Guard is certainly one to be proud of. I am confident the Coast Guard can and will do a better job of conveying the many opportunities it offers, but the Coast Guard needs our help to ensure robust support for Coasties as they conduct these missions. Without affordable housing, Coasties are required to commute hours to work. Without medical access, Coasties go without health care. Without modern facilities and technology, Coasties work in substandard conditions. Without adequate childcare, parents will simply leave the service. So I applaud Admiral Fagan for her refreshing approach, exemplified by the slogan, "Tomorrow will look different and so will we." If the Coast Guard does not rethink its way of doing business, recruitment and retention will only get harder. And quality of life is a recruitment and retention issue. And while it's incumbent on the Coast Guard to tell us what they need, Congress needs to do better to support the women and men who serve. The challenges facing the U.S. Merchant Marine are similar to that of the Coast Guard. As workers increasingly value flexibility, a maritime career, which often entails living on a ship for several months, is less attractive. But also, like the Coast Guard, pardon me, more water, Carvajal. But also, like the Coast Guard, it's an industry that offers the opportunity to contribute to society in a valuable way. U.S. merchant mariners deliver the majority of defense materials overseas, ensure the delivery of U.S. food aid, and protect our domestic economic security. And further, a career at sea allows women and men to see the world. To attract more mariners to the industry, Congress and the administration must ensure stable employment opportunities. That means full and consistent funding for the Maritime Security Program and the Tanker Security Program. That means ensuring full compliance with cargo preference laws. That means sending a strong message that the Jones Act will not be eroded or repealed. In the recently reported Coast Guard Authorization Act, I am very pleased that this committee included several provisions aimed at increasing the pool of merchant mariners. One of those provisions would better align licensing requirements with international standards to remove a burden upon the mariner while maintaining safety. Another would fix an anomaly in the law to allow people from American Samoa to enter the industry. I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure these provisions become law, and I also look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about other ways to attract and retain merchant mariners. With that, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I'll recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Carvajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing to review recruiting issues in both the Coast Guard and the Merchant Marines. The Coast Guard is facing a recruiting deficit of over 4,800 active duty personnel. Every sector of the economy is facing recruiting challenges, and the military is no different. As views towards work have changed over the past years, many industries are facing labor shortages as workers are looking for a job that not only values them as an employee, but offers an experience that provides value in return. Service members have always been at the core of the service, and without them, mission success would not be possible. The Coast Guard understands this. In 2021, 100% of Coasties who were married to other Coasties were stationed together. This is one of the many reasons that the highest retention rate among military, that it has the highest retention rate among military services. Despite the critical role that Coast Guard plays in our national security, economy, and ensuring the safety of lives at sea, the Coast Guard is the second smallest branch of the military, and chronic disinvestment in the Coast Guard has forced them to do more with less. Chronic underinvestment has resulted in reduced services for Coasties and their families, including housing, health care, and child care. We must do more to improve the lives of these hardworking individuals by providing the quality care they deserve. By doing so, recruitment will no doubt improve. Recruiting and retaining personnel is imperative for the success of the Coast Guard, as it is in all branches of the military. I'm interested to hear today about the Coast Guard's plans to recruit and retain personnel with a particular focus on diversity and inclusion in the coming years. Despite the Coast Guard's efforts to improve representation of women and minorities within its workforce, leadership in the service still struggles to reflect the demographic of our nation. The Coast Guard is the least diverse branch of the military. We must build on the efforts being made to recruit and retain diverse personnel. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Coast Guard adapted by offering increased flexibility and remote working options. Many employees continue to want this flexibility moving forward, and it will be important to carefully consider how to recruit and retain diverse personnel in a modern work environment. Access to childcare and family resources is crucial for long-term retention of personnel and quality of life for both service members and their families. Providing adequate childcare and medical services is especially important retaining female personnel who face unique barriers to promotional opportunities. The Coast Guard oversees the credentialing of mariners. The antiquated paper system used to process merchant mariner credentials result in delays. It is unreasonable that a mariner should wait months while the Coast Guard processes a credential. While we do not know the exact mariner shortage because the Coast Guard's credentialing system is so out of date, it is estimated that the industry would need at least 1,000 more mariners to fulfill sea lift requirements. Not only must we improve mariner recruiting, but we too must ensure that this industry is inclusive and reflects the demographics of our country. Lastly, I want to highlight the forceful action the service has taken to address sexual assault and sexual harassment. Make no mistake, though, this continues to be a pervasive problem throughout the maritime industry, and it is affecting recruiting. We must hold the Coast Guard accountable to ensure accusations are followed by investigations and, in cases where appropriate, convictions. If industry is not perceived as safe, then how can we expect prospective mariners to want to join? We want to do better recruiting a diverse workforce for both the Coast Guard and the Merchant Marine, and Congress plays an important role in that. I look forward to hearing from our panel today on how we can work together to solve these challenges. And before I close, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the work of one Coastie in particular. Sherry Ann Thompson has been a Coast Guard Fellow for the committee for the past 2 years and completes her service on Friday. Her contributions to 2 Coast Guard bills have resulted in better policy for the service and maritime industry. Thank you, Sherry Ann, and best of luck in Miami. Secondly, I'd like to also recognize Captain Dorothy Harness, who is right here as well. She has served as a liaison to the House. She has done an incredible job, and I wish her the best in her future work that I understand is going to be pretty close by. I've had the pleasure of traveling with Dorothy and the service, and she's just a remarkable individual, and I want to recognize. Plus, she loves wine from my region. Congratulations on your next step, Dorothy. Finally, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement on behalf of the Maritime Labor.
Thank you very much.
Can we have that without objection, Mr. Chair?
Oh, yeah, maybe.
I'm just checking, just check.
Without objection. Once again, I'd like to welcome our witnesses and glad for them to be here today and briefly explain our little light system on the clock on the side there. Green is go, yellow is you're almost out of time, and red means stop. I'd like unanimous consent that the witness' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, show that ordered. As your testimony has been made part of the record, the committee asks that you limit your remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Vice Admiral Thomas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carvajal, Congressman Larson, and distinguished members of the committee. I truly do appreciate the opportunity to testify today on this very important topic. And Congressman Carvajal, thank you for recognizing our outstanding Coast Guard folks, because these two are just representative of our entire service. As you all know, the U.S. Coast Guard is the world's premier multi-mission maritime service, and we're responsible for safety, security, and stewardship in the maritime domain. Our 57,000 active duty reserve and civilian personnel, supported by 21,000 auxiliary volunteers, conduct vital homeland security and safety and defense missions around the globe every hour of every day. A Coast Guard that is always ready to take on current challenges of the nation must attract, recruit, and retain talented people, the very best our nation has to offer. Recruiting difficulties for all the services began prior to COVID-19 pandemic and then worsened, resulting in a recruiting environment today that is significantly more complicated and challenging than it ever has been. For the past 4 years, the Coast Guard has not met its recruiting goal, and this year will be no different. The current Coast Guard workforce shortage is being mitigated in the short term, but in the long term, this shortage threatens the service's ability to conduct missions which are vital to our nation. The Coast Guard is bolstering recruiting efforts to generate more leads, improve the recruiting process, increase recruiting capacity and performance. We're updating materials and marketing efforts to ensure the service's brand resonates with young people. We have 6 active Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps, JROTC programs, and we'll have 4 more online by the start of the 2023 academic year. We're opening new recruiting offices, deploying individual recruiters to key locations, modernizing the recruiting process, adopting new technology and solutions, and recruiting in ways and in places we never have before. We're also focused on removing or reducing barriers to service by aligning our medical standards with those of the Department of Defense, increasing age limits, reducing family size limitations, opening paths for single parents, providing English as a second language and personal resilience training, and providing an easier pathway to service and to citizenship for legal permanent residents. While recruiting our workforce is critically important, returning our workforce is equally so, and it requires at least as much effort and investment. Under the direction of our Commandant, the Coast Guard is taking action to ensure workforce policies, processes, infrastructure provide better flexibility, transparency, and predictability and support to our members and their families. We must make it easier to serve and to continue to serve for a full career. And as you've already noted, providing support to our workforce and their families in the form of pay and benefits, housing, health care, and child services is essential to retaining talent. And we are grateful to the Congress and to this committee in particular for your support in this regard. But we will need more support. Housing, health care, child care are challenges around the nation and for all the services. But they are particularly challenging for our Coast Guard members because we are not a garrisoned force. We live in the communities we serve, and that is often in remote coastal areas with few support services and disproportionately high cost of living. Like the Coast Guard, the U.S. maritime industry faces an ongoing workforce shortage. Our merchant marine and credentialed mariners are vital to America's economic prosperity and national security, so the Coast Guard is focused on doing what we can do to help mitigate that shortage. We have taken steps to modernize our credentialing process to eliminate duplication of effort and improve flexibility. We have also improved the ability of members of the armed forces to seek and obtain a credential through the Military to Maritime Mariner program. And as a result of those efforts, the number of credential applicants with military service has doubled since 2016. We know that in order to recruit and retain the professional mariner workforce this nation needs, their work environment must be free from fear and harassment, and the Coast Guard is dedicated to doing our part. With the help of Congress, we continue to overhaul the reporting and review process for incidents of sexual misconduct and harassment in the merchant fleet by removing barriers to reporting, utilizing trained criminal investigators to respond to reports, and enhancing background screening and ensuring accountability through our service's suspension and revocation authorities. Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, distinguished committee members, it's truly a privilege to appear before you today. I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Rear Admiral Phillips. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your support for the Maritime Administration, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding mariner requirements to support our nation's sea lift capability. In so many ways, the U.S. Merchant Marine is critical to our nation's economy and our military. Our ability to project power around the globe requires our commercial vessel operators, as well as MARAD's Ready Reserve Force and the Military Sea Lift Command. All of these vessels draw from the same pool of merchant mariners with unlimited tonnage credentials. Ensuring that we have a robust pool of mariners with the appropriate credentials is a critical priority for MARAD. A study prepared by the Maritime Workforce Working Group and released by MARAD in 2017 found the U.S. was short about 1,800 mariners with unlimited tonnage credentials to sustain a full activation to meet sea lift needs in an uncontested environment. During the 6 years since the 2017 study was released, globally standardized credentialing requirements have had an impact on the U.S. Merchant Marine, and of course, the maritime industry has also been profoundly affected by the COVID pandemic. Mariner credentials are issued by the U.S. Coast Guard, but their IT systems are challenged to provide granular detail regarding sea lift qualified mariners. That said, ascertaining the size of the mariner pool that could be activated requires knowing not only the number of mariners with valid credentials, but the number from among that pool who would be available and willing to serve, including in a contested environment. Panning back, we also have to keep in mind that requirements for sea lift qualified mariners are a function of the size of the U.S. flagged fleet, which also determines the number and type of job opportunities available to mariners. Full activation of the sea lift fleet would involve our U.S. flagged commercially operated fleet sailing internationally, larger ocean-going Jones Act vessels requiring mariners with unlimited tonnage credentials, vessels operated by the Military Sea Lift Command, and the nearly 50 vessels comprising MARAD's Ready Reserve Force. All of these vessels draw crew members from the same constrained pool of sea lift mariners, sea lift qualified mariners. Pursuant to 46 U.S.C. 50101, the United States is to have a merchant marine that is, a quote, sufficient to carry a substantial part of the waterborne commerce, import and export foreign commerce of the United States. However, MARAD estimates that we carry less than 2% of our waterborne foreign commerce on U.S. flagged vessels, and the commercially operated U.S. flagged fleet moving commerce in the foreign trade is comprised of just 85 vessels. Fundamentally, addressing our nation's mariner needs requires a whole of government effort paired with multifaceted industry initiatives. As part of that collaboration, MARAD is working to strengthen the mariner workforce and our U.S. flagged foreign trading fleet, noting that the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy is the primary source of licensed mariners with service obligations. The Biden-Harris administration has been addressing the many long-standing and systemic challenges at the Academy as well. We are also continuing our effort to ensure that every American drawn to service at sea is respected and can succeed on the basis of their skill and professionalism. We also administer federal programs that support the 6 state maritime academies, and we're building extraordinary new training ships called the National Security Multi-Mission Vessels that will also be exceptional recruiting tools. The first ship, the Empire State, will be delivered very soon. In September 2022, I convened a forum with industry stakeholders to solicit and discuss options for strengthening mariner recruitment and retention. I appreciate the many thoughtful industry proposals that are being offered. Under the Biden-Harris administration, MARAD is also working to grow the U.S. flagged fleet and create new job opportunities for American mariners. In 2021, MARAD stood up the Cable Security Fleet program, which brought 2 cable-laying vessels under the U.S. flag. In December 2022, MARAD issued an interim final rule to create the new Tanker Security program. We will shortly announce the first 10 ships selected for enrollment. which will create new employment opportunities for approximately 500 U.S. mariners. Marietta is also continuing our work to support effective implementation of cargo preference requirements. To help attract additional vessels to our flag in 2022, the Biden-Harris administration proposed that Congress eliminate the 3-year period that vessels entering the U.S. flag must currently wait before they are eligible to carry civilian agency preference cargoes. However, though implementation of this proposal would have cost nothing, it was not adopted. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. McLeod.
Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss GAO's recent work related to Coast Guard recruitment and retention issues. Ensuring the United States has a sufficient number of qualified military personnel is a matter of national security. The ability to recruit and retain active duty, reserve, and civilian personnel is critical to maintaining unit readiness and morale, ensuring sufficient levels of experienced leaders, and avoiding unnecessary costs. But the services face recruiting and retention challenges. This includes the Coast Guard, which has missed its recruiting targets for the past 4 years and estimates it is short 4,800 members. Our work has highlighted some challenges that the Coast Guard faces in recruiting and retaining certain segments of the workforce. 2 areas we have recently reported on include cyberspace personnel and marine inspectors. Like other federal agencies, the Coast Guard is increasingly dependent on its cyberspace workforce to maintain and protect its information systems and data from threats. We reported in September 2022 that the service faced persistent challenges filling its cyberspace positions that it considers as critical. According to the Coast Guard, the service has had difficulty filling and retaining personnel for these jobs, as many were leaving for higher-paying positions in the private sector. Our review resulted in 5 recommendations. Among these recommendations is that the Coast Guard establish a strategic workforce plan for its cyberspace workforce and set and quantify retention goals and objectives. The Coast Guard agreed with our recommendations and has taken some steps towards addressing them. However, until the Coast Guard implements its workforce plan, it will likely miss opportunities to recruit for difficult-to-fill cyberspace positions. Further, for decades, the Coast Guard has faced challenges maintaining an adequate staff of marine inspectors. These personnel, which can be active duty or civilians, board vessels to determine whether they meet safety, security, and environmental requirements. In particular, marine inspectors we met with reported a number of factors that could negatively affect retention. This includes long work hours, higher paying private sector opportunities, the requirement to move to undesirable locations, and limited promotion opportunities. We found that the Coast Guard has taken several steps to increase both military and civilian marine inspector recruitment and retention. However, we also found that the Coast Guard did not regularly collect and analyze certain industry and workforce data, such as future potential retirements of Coast Guard personnel, which could affect retention of marine inspectors. As a result, we recommended that the Coast Guard collect additional data to forecast future workforce needs. The Coast Guard recently awarded a contract to study and fully model the marine inspection workforce. It does not expect to complete this project until summer of 2025. In addition, we've highlighted challenges related to service members' quality of life, such as access to health care, child care, educational opportunities, and housing, all of which may affect the Coast Guard's ability to retain personnel. Finally, we found that the Coast Guard has not fully assessed its workforce needs, which could help inform its recruiting goals. Specifically, as of March 2023, Coast Guard reported that it has assessed its workforce needs for just 15% of units. One of our outstanding recommendations from this work is for the Coast Guard to update its workforce planning document with timeframes and milestones for completion. In closing, ensuring the U.S. has a sufficient number of qualified military personnel is a matter of national security. Taking additional steps to implement GAO's recommendations will further help the Coast Guard address recruitment and retention issues as the service continues to monitor new challenges. At the request of this committee, we plan to initiate a review of the Coast Guard's efforts to recruit and retain its workforce this summer. In addition, we have ongoing work examining the Coast Guard's process for credentialing merchant mariners that we expect to complete by late summer. Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittee, this completes my statement. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Ash. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Can you hear me? Doesn't seem like the mic. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to testify today. Each year, the armed services set accession missions, which are their goals for how many people they want to recruit that year. The services rarely miss their accession missions, but in fiscal year 2022, the Coast Guard missed its accession mission by over 25%. The other services struggled as well. The Army not only missed its accession mission, it did so by a historic amount. Unfortunately, 3 of the 4 services, as now I hear a 4th service, are on track to fail to meet their accession missions for 2023. My comments summarize some of the key insights from a large body of research that's been conducted on military recruiting on why this crisis might be occurring, and more importantly, what might be done to address it. Most of what's known about military recruiting is based on research for the other services, most notably the Army, where, owing to its large recruiting requirement, problems usually show up first when they arise. That said, what we know about recruiting in the other services is likely to be relevant to the Coast Guard to some extent, since the Coast Guard recruits from a similar pool of Americans and asks those who serve to make similarly difficult sacrifices. The body of research covers decades and covers a wide array of topics. These include eligibility for enlistment and the role of waivers, factors affecting young people's decisions to enlist, recruiting resource management, including enlistment bonuses, recruiters, advertising, and educational benefits, and the role of competing opportunities, including those in the civilian economy, as well as in 2-year and 4-year college. It's likely each of these factors are relevant to today's recruiting challenges, though to date no rigorous peer-reviewed analysis has been done of the recruiting crisis, so it's not yet possible to identify the leading causes of the recruiting crisis that account and controls for all the relevant factors. Research does provide considerable insight into what the services should be doing in the short and long term to address the crisis. In the short run, the services should be focusing on policies that research shows work. First, they should meet congressional end strength requirements by increasing retention. While the services are struggling to meet their recruiting goals, all of them, including the Coast Guard, are meeting their retention objectives overall. Second, the services should offer more enlistment bonuses and increase the dollar amount of those bonuses. Research shows that bonuses are effective in expanding the market and have a particularly large effect on channeling recruits into hard-to-fill specialties, and they can be turned on quickly. Their disadvantage is that they're costly and less effective than advertising and recruiters, which research shows are highly cost-effective recruiting resources. Third, the services should modestly increase the share of recruits without a high school diploma, staying within the Department of Defense guidelines to only enlist at most 10% of such recruits. While these recruits are more likely to fail to complete their enlistment contract and have other performance issues, research shows that a modest increase would have a minor overall effect on the performance of the overall entering cohort. For the long term, the armed services should focus on gaining a better understanding of relevant factors that are changing and identifying how to respond to them. These include, first, gaining a better understanding of factors explaining the decline in the labor force participation of young people and what that means for recruiting. Second, understanding why public trust in the military has declined and how factors explaining that decline affect recruiting, if at all, controlling for other factors. Third, identifying how to optimize marketing and advertising in the age of social media, developing an effective set of messages that connect with the target audience, and consider the use of non-traditional media, such as streaming services, to implement that marketing strategy. And fourth, open the aperture of eligibility for enlistment by validating current enlistment standards and identifying whether such standards are out of date or screening out applicants who would otherwise be successful in the armed services. In addition, the services should aggressively experiment with promising new ideas for improving their recruiting efforts, but be equally aggressive at dropping those that fail to live up to their promise. As more data becomes available, the services should be doing rigorous analysis to identify the underlying causes of the crisis, policy effects, and where to target their future recruiting efforts. I thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you all for your testimony, and we'll turn now to the questions for the panel. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for the first set of questions. Vice Admiral Thomas. The Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2023, reported by the committee last month, includes $9 million for Coast Guard to streamline the application process. How does the system compare with the systems used by other armed services, and does the current system negatively impact recruiting efforts?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. I'm not exactly sure which system you're referring to in that question. You're talking about the system that we use to bring recruits into the service?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are modernizing that system. We're about to launch in June an application that is called Gangway that will allow our recruiters to do a better job of maintaining contact with potential recruits in a manner now that's all on paper. This new technology will allow them to automatically send texts to our potential recruits and keep in contact with them, and then also not require recruits to come into an office, but we can bring the office to them, including all the recruitment paperwork that can be signed digitally. This is what the other services are doing. In fact, we are borrowing a capability that the Army developed in order to bring the modern tools to our recruiters.
So is the money we authorized increasing your recruiting numbers?
Well, certainly we've gotten money in in FY23 and 24 that we've been using for a number of purposes, increase recruiting, but also increase retention. So we've added recruiters to our fleet. We've opened new recruiting offices. We've opened one new one. We have another 6 or so in the queue to open up. We have increased bonuses. We've increased, the number of people that we have doing cold calling. So yes, the money has definitely been helpful, and we have seen an increase in the numbers in terms of people getting to boot camp.
So, what progress have you made using the junior ROTC, and how has that kind of worked out?
Well, thank you for that question, because as I mentioned, we have 6 active JRTC units currently. That covers 2 of our Coast Guard districts. We have a requirement to have 1 in each district by the end of 2025. We're on track to meet that requirement. We should have, as I mentioned, 4 more JRTC units stood up by the beginning of the next academic year. Right now we have 2 former JRTC cadets at our Coast Guard Academy. We have 1 at one of our prep schools, so they will be at the Coast Guard Academy. And JRTC is a great way for us to get people into the Coast Guard, but it's also a great way for us to contribute to those communities. So we're excited about it and moving forward.
Rear Admiral Phillips, Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2023, as reported by this committee, authorized $11 million for the Coast Guard to modernize its outdated merchant marine leasing and documentation system. As Merit relies on the Coast Guard system to determine the number of available mariners for the surge sea lift operations, can you explain what capabilities Merit needs from the system to make these determinations?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. As you highlighted in the FY 2023 NDAA, we are tasked to work with Transcom to provide a requirements document to the Coast Guard in support of our needs, and we are doing that, and they will have that very shortly. They are certainly aware of it. Putting it succinctly, we need an understanding of how many mariners there are and what qualification levels they hold, their medical status, and as an aside, and something we will need to do ourselves, their willingness to sail in time of crisis. The current Coast Guard database is not queryable, and we are very optimistic working with the Coast Guard that the new database will permit us to query under such circumstances to have a better understanding of where we stand related to qualified mariners.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Larson, you're recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that point, I have a question for Admiral Thomas. If Congress were to fund the $11 million for the on your unfunded priorities list to modernize the credentialing system, how would that affect processing time? How quickly could you modernize to a standard to do a more efficient job of approving credentials?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And although that is not currently in my portfolio, I've worked in that area before, so I am familiar. I mean, we have a system now that was built in the 90s, and it was...
In the 1990s?
Yes, sir, right.
Okay, thanks.
$11 million that's on the UPOL is a down payment to the system that we actually need to build. And we are prepared to move out. We have a requirements working group that's working with Maritime and MSC. It will absolutely improve our processing time, but it will also absolutely improve the depth of knowledge about that particular workforce. So right now, I could not, for example, tell you how many mariners are operating on a medical waiver associated with pacemakers. Can't do that. But when we build a new modern system, we'll be able to answer a lot of those types of questions.
If 11 million is the start, what's the end?
Well, you know, that's difficult to know right now until we have finalized the requirements, but it's somewhere between 11 and $16 million, we think that, and we're working with, you know, our FACAs, MERPAC, et cetera, to really refine what those requirements are.
Yeah. Does 11 million, you say you started, does it get us a result on moving quicker on credentialing? Or do we have to wait for the whole thing to get done?
Oh, no, sir, that absolutely is scalable, and with $11 million, we'll be able to move out.
Yeah. For Ms. McLeod from GAO, can you talk a little bit more about, the Coast Guard might be able to answer this too, but enlisted versus officers, and are there differences in ability to recruit depending on an enlisted person versus an officer?
Our work to date has really focused on the retention of the workforce, and we found that recruiting additional civilian personnel for certain workforces can prove to be a benefit to the Coast Guard. But I do look forward to our upcoming studies of recruitment and retention issues within the Coast Guard.
On the cyber workforce, I know that the National Guard provides support as well as frontline cyber support in the military. Is there something similar that can apply to the Coast Guard?
Yeah, I mean, the Coast Guard is in line with what we've observed with other federal agencies in terms of bringing its workforce up to speed and up to date and filling those necessary positions with personnel. The federal government as a whole is a bit behind in this area, and the Coast Guard is one of those agencies as well.
Yeah. Admiral Thomas, could you address that?
Yeah, Congressman, absolutely. So first, with regard to officer recruiting, we have a deficit in our officer corps, but it's not because of a recruiting problem. It's because of capacity at our session points. We have no problem getting people to want to come into the Coast Guard to be an officer, but we're at max capacity. With regard to our cyber workforce, so we just recently stood up the first what we call a functional flotilla in our Coast Guard Auxiliary that are doing cyber work for us. These are cyber professionals in their real life, and they volunteer for the Coast Guard. And we also have a reserve contingent in our cyber workforce. We are challenged, like everyone, to retain highly trained cyber professionals, but that's where we focus our bonuses and education that comes with obligations, and so we're trying to manage it that way.
Yeah. Administrator Phillips, you mentioned in your testimony that calls for a legislative change that relates to the requirement that vessels be flagged in the U.S. for 3 years before carrying food aid cargoes. And how would that change benefit the fleet and increase opportunities for merchant mariners?
Congressman, thank you for that question, sir. It would give us more access to more vessels, and we believe there are cargoes that they could carry, particularly in the civilian agency side, as you mentioned, USAID, USDA. We believe there is some capacity there, and so flagging in additional vessels that could work with those agencies to carry that capacity will bring more mariners into the fleet, and as you are aware, more ships generates more mariners because of the need.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
I'm advised we have a couple of Coast Guard Academy cadets here, and I'd like to identify yourself. Ezra Tertrault?
Yes, Chairman, right here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Okay, somebody grab him. And then we have
We got them, sir.
And there's John Regal. Thanks for coming today. Good to see you. Representative Babin. Yep. Representative Babin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it. Thank you all witnesses, appreciate you being here as well. The U.S. Coast Guard and American merchant mariners both are vital to keeping our ships moving and our waterways safe. However, as your testimony states, recruiting is way down, and we members of the subcommittee are, deeply concerned with that. And so my first set of questions, Admiral Phillips, thank you for being here as well. I'm hoping to get some clarification from you on an employee of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, which I know you have jurisdiction over. Mr. Anton Tripolsky's, the Merchant Marine Academy Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Director, has been outspoken, very outspoken, about race and gender in the United States. He has made it clear that he believes that white males, the same white males that make up the majority of the U.S. Merchant Marine, are to blame for sexual violence in the United States. In fact, Mr. Tripolsky, who is white and male, has made these kinds of comments repeatedly. He's been very vocal on Twitter, and as we all know, once you tweet something on Twitter, it's there forever. And so that means that the Merchant Marine Academy should have been very aware of his comments on Twitter before they hired him. And if they did, in fact, see his comments and then decide to hire him, these comments must not be of concern to those who are in charge of hiring the Academy's faculty and staff. So I'm asking you, do you believe that misogyny and racism grow from the same white male root, quote unquote, as Mr. Tripolsky stated?
Congressman, thank you for that question. And of course, we are in receipt of your letter on this topic.
Yes, ma'am.
And we have seen the tweet in that letter that is referred to that is several years old. Irrespective of what this employee of the Academy may have done in the past, my focus and that of Vice Admiral Noonan, who is the superintendent, are looking towards the future. And in that context, building an environment of value that includes inclusiveness of all midshipmen, staff, parents, faculty, alumni at the Academy, that values people's participation based on their professionalism and skill, and that we build a team to produce the world's finest merchant mariners, which are vital to the nation's economic and national security. So we are looking to the future here.
Well, I'm not understanding what your answer is.
Reliving the past so that we can move forward with a collective body to graduate again.
My question, Admiral, is do you believe that misogyny and racism grow from the same white male root as this gentleman who is employed as someone in control of the way things are being done there at the Merchant Marine Academy? Do you believe that what he said is true? Yes or no?
Well, sir, his statements were made a number of years ago, and I have no indication that they apply to his current position. And again, I have spoken with Vice Admiral Noonan. We are moving forward with a future, a collective future for the Academy that values everyone, including white men, for their professionalism and skill, and ensures that we have a team to move forward in the context of building
Well,
Mariner's strongest.
I understand what you're saying, and you're kind of dodging. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy needs experienced leaders training our merchant mariners, not some social justice warrior who's laser-focused on DEI ideology, expanding abortion, or accusing individuals of inherent racism based purely on their skin color, which is illegal, by the way, since 1965. So while military branches face a worsening recruiting crisis, once pristine service academies seem to be losing their sight of their mission. And so I would encourage you to consider this in your responsibilities over the Merchant Marine Academy. I find your answer insufficient, and really am concerned when I see a shortfall of recruitment going on really throughout the services, but especially here at the Merchant Marine Academy. That's very concerning to me to see someone in charge of what Mr. Topolsky's position is and saying things as he says. Racism, that's all I can say. I hope you will consider that. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Giramondi, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm hesitant to jump into the fray of the previous question, but I will simply say that there is ample evidence that there is a systemic problem existing in the maritime industry. It finds its way into the Merchant Mariner Academy. There are numerous reports of sexual assault, misogyny, and other activities going on, not only at this academy, but all of our academies, and it has to be dealt with. Admiral Phillips, I know you're aggressively doing that, and I encourage you to continue to go at it. Whatever the root cause might be, it has to be dealt with. Now, I won't comment on yesterday's court decision in New York with regard to a similar issue, but I will say that this must be dealt with. Admiral Phillips, Admiral Thomas, I encourage you to do everything in your power to deal with these problems. Specifically more than 50% of the American population is female. If we're going to recruit and fill the ranks, we're going to have to reach out to the women, young and not so young. And if this problem is not dealt with, we will not be able to successfully recruit 50% of the American population, whatever the root cause might be. It has to be dealt with. Now let me go to another matter here. In the years I've been on this subcommittee, including the years that I was not on it, with regard to the merchant mariner system and the merchant marine, I keep hearing it's all about cargo. If you don't have the cargo, you don't have the ships, and you don't have the personnel for the ships. In 2012, in its lack of wisdom, the Congress reduced the compelled cargo from 75% to 50%. As long as that remains in effect, we will not have the opportunity for cargo for American ships. And I draw this to the attention of this committee that has this specific opportunity and responsibility to address this issue. Unfortunately, there are other committees involved. But beyond that, I want to address the issue of the availability or the non-availability of American ships. Right now, the responsibility to determine the availability or non-availability is basically to the American entity that is, a government entity that is doing the shipments. For example, the military. The military can on its own decide that there is not an available ship. Similarly, USDA and USAID. So, my question to you, Admiral Phillips, is why don't you take the responsibility? And why doesn't this committee straighten this out so that there is one federal agency that is specifically responsible for this area that can make the determination of the availability? Admiral Phillips, I appreciate your comment on this.
So Congressman Garamendi, sir, thank you very much for your comments all the way around. We appreciate them. We understand them. From the context of cargo preference, we certainly understand the challenges that the agencies find in confirming whether or not there are ships available. Of course, Department of Defense is in one circumstance, they have a 100% requirement. The others have a 50% requirement. However, I would defer to Congress and from the context of how such determinations should be made and who should make them.
Excuse my jumping on, but if you had the responsibility, could you effectively make the decision about the availability of American ships?
Sir, thank you again for that question. Of course, we work today to be a part of that process, and so we do have an understanding of it, and we work within the authorities that we have, which do involve others in making that decision. We are certainly familiar with the process.
Shall I take that as a yes?
Again, sir, we defer to Congress on how they would like this to be run. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bean, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, T&I Subcommittee. It's good to see you here. I got the privilege of visiting Coast Guard Mayport and spent the morning there and have fully recognized the mission of the Coast Guard, and it was very eye-opening, and just appreciate everybody, the hospitality that they showed. If you're in the audience and you are in the Coast Guard, you are planning to be in the Coast Guard, or have served in the Coast Guard, will you stand and let us recognize you? There's a whole lot of Coasties here. Go ahead, stand up. Very good. Thank you very much. I will I'm going to make a bold statement, and you would think this isn't going to be a big deal, but it is something that I believe both sides agree on. How about that? Both sides agree that we want a very strong Coast Guard. A strong Coast Guard is a strong America. So I think we're on board that we want to make sure that we hit our goals and hit all the retention mission of keeping qualified people who have already trained and we've already invested in them, the skills and leadership to make sure that our Coast Guard is strong. Which leads into my question is, how many folks did we kick out because they refused the mRNA shot?
Well, Congressman, first of all, thanks for visiting our team there in Jacksonville. As a former Sector Jacksonville commander, I know that area well, and our folks really love to live and serve there, so thanks for that. With regard to separations due to failure to get a COVID vaccine, we separated a total of 247 individuals. Since the mandate has been lifted by Congress, we've been in touch with every single one of them and offered them a pathway back to the service. About 148 have indicated they want to come back. And in addition to that, we are reaching out to every person who left the service over the last 2 years, even if it was voluntary, because it may have been related to COVID, and we're offering them a pathway back. Unlike the other services, everyone who left the Coast Guard left with an honorable discharge and with a re-enlistment code that allows them to come back. So I appreciate the question, and we are really actively, we have stood up a special team called the Return to Service Team that's just focused on this.
Is it all about money? Is money the name of the game?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Is money, how big a part of, is money a part of coming back? Was that part of coming back? What did you offer them to come back? Or tell us about,
We'd offered them to come back, just like anyone who had served before and indicates they want to come back in the service. There's no money issues involved.
Gotcha, and it was like they'd never left, or that's what the invite was? Come on back, we'll put you back where you were, and...
Absolutely, and back on advancement lists, promotion lists. Can't guarantee them the same assignment, but we're bringing them back at the same rank and rate.
Very good. No, thank you, thank you. And those numbers are a lot better than some of the other branches. I also serve on, I think there's a handful of us serve on education and workforce. I chair the subcommittee on K through 12. We're kind of re-examining what the future of K through 12 should look like. We realize now that 2/3 of our students are not going to go to college. A third are, but the 2/3, we're really focusing on getting everybody to college when that in reality that's not realistic. We want to make sure that they have other options, including vocational programs or access to vocational schools. What do we need to do? And this is a toss-up for anybody. What should we do to make sure that high school students or even in the middle school to have a career track to go to the military and specifically the Coast Guard? Is there anybody have a thought on what that would look like?
We certainly are very active reaching out to high schools and also to trade schools. So we've begun to bring people into our service who have skills in what we call lateral entry. So we may have gone to a culinary school, we found someone who knows how to cook, we can bring them into our service as a second-class petty officer, teach them what they need to know about Coast Guard paperwork and Coast Guard history and leadership, but we're bringing them in that way so they don't necessarily have to start at the bottom and work their
So
way.
we're already reaching out to high schools. That's part of the recruitment process. Very good. So with our last just few seconds, I'm going to give the Rear Admiral one more chance of a yes or no. We only have time for a yes or no questions. Do you want to, another bite of the apple, just a yes or no? Do you want to repudiate the racist comments of the guy that you hired? Yes or no?
Sir, as I've stated before, we are focused on the future.
Oh, my time has expired. I'm so sorry. I yield back.
Mr. Easel, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee continues to hear the maritime industry about the significant shortages of U.S. mariners. This deeply concerns me, especially as China continues to expand its shipbuilding capabilities. To strengthen our national security and meet the needs of our nation's economy, we must continue to promote and improve programs that support recruiting and training of mariners. Admiral Phillips, we know that increasing the number of individuals with merchant mariner credentials will support the industry and ultimately sea lift operations. As you also know, many jobs in the shipbuilding industry do not require these credentials and instead require trade qualifications such as welders and electricians. While we're well aware of the shortage of credentialed mariners, can you talk about some of the other sectors that lack qualified workers to carry out the job?
So, Congressman, sir, thank you for that question. Of course, our focus at the maritime industry is on mariners who will sail, and to that end, on providing opportunities and to expand capacity there in particular. As you point out, and as several members have pointed out, there are opportunities here for young people to join the maritime industry, to come in as unlicensed mariners and work their way up. This provides them good-paying jobs that can serve them for the rest of their lives. From the context of working with other industries that support the maritime industry, particularly in ports and that kind of sector, we do oversee the Port Infrastructure Development Program, which, as you are aware, provides opportunities to strengthen capacity for ports, and in that context provides jobs to many of the skill sets that you talk about to support that work to improve capacity across our ports and waterways.
Okay. Ms. McLeod, could you comment on that as well?
Our work to date has focused on the credentialing process itself that we have underway, and as was noted earlier, this is a paper process. We have seen issues with the actual printers themselves that have caused some delays. So we do have a study underway looking at the process itself, the processing times, what those actually are. There can be a difference between the Mariner experience and what are the official times for processing, as well as the performance of the processing itself. So again, we have a study underway, and I expect that we'll be sharing the results of that study later this summer.
Thank you. Admiral Phillips, what do you recommend that Congress should implement to boost employment?
Thank you for that question, sir. I think any opportunity to expand our capacity across the maritime industry, of course, more broadly, but also to expand our capacity in shipyards and at ports is a way to drive a need, which will then drive capacity to bring more people into the industry. I should add that our small shipyard grant program also can provide funds for small shipyards to do apprenticeship training, and that is yet another way to bring in young people into the shipyard or ship repair industry and give them opportunities. And I would also add that the small shipyard grant program is vastly oversubscribed. It's a $20 million a year program, and we typically get about 80 million or so in applications for grants for that program alone. So there are certainly opportunities there to improve capacity.
Admiral Thomas, could you add anything to that?
Well, certainly, I mean, when you asked the question about where else are we seeing critical skill shortages, and certainly in shipyards as we're building our new cutters, labor is a challenge, and it is one of the reasons why shipbuilding projects run behind schedule and over budget. So we're focused on helping to build the military industrial base. That's a challenge for our nation, and we need to all stay focused on that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Golden, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all of our witnesses being here today. Hillary Skolton from Michigan's 3rd Congressional District, beautiful Coast Guard installation in Grand Haven and Muskegon. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about these critical recruitment and retention issues, which is truly a national security issue. Currently, the Coast Guard is operating with nearly 5,000 fewer guardsmen and women than they need, and has consistently failed to meet recruiting goals. This is a serious problem. We know that the Coast Guard is critical to a number of key security priorities, including drug interdiction, maritime law enforcement, anti-terrorism responses, and icebreaking. We need to adopt some serious solutions. 2 concerns that have come up in my conversations with my local Coast Guard station in Grand Haven is pay stability and housing. Vice Admiral Thomas, 2/3 of military members report that security and stability of the job had a great influence on their decision to join the military. And 31% report that military pay had a great or very great influence on their decision to join the military. During the 2019 government shutdown, Coast Guard's men and women endured a 35-day lapse in pay because, as you are aware, they do not receive pay as other branches of the military do in the event of a government shutdown. My first question for you is, if hypothetically we were to experience another government shutdown, I don't know why anyone would think we would be flirting with that idea right now. Do you think our Coast Guard men and women, particularly some of the youngest recruits, are in a position to float that lapse in pay with their savings, pay for their own child care, or is there a risk that they might seek alternative employment where they would have stable pay?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question, and I've been to Grand Haven twice in the last month recently, so our Coasties up there love the place, and obviously Grand Haven loves our Coast Guard, so we appreciate that.
We do.
Yeah, I was an operational commander when we had the pay lapse, and it absolutely impacted our readiness. When you were about to get onto a helicopter to go put your life at risk and you're wondering, is my family all right? Or if you're at sea, for an extended period of time, and your family's at home without pay, those are hard things to deal with. So absolutely, pay stability is one of the reasons why the members join the military, and when we can't provide that, I think we break faith with our workforce.
I couldn't agree more. Recently, with Rep. Gonzalez-Colon, we introduced a Pay Our Coast Guard Parity Act, which would ensure that our Coast Guard men and women get paid in the event of a government shutdown. It's so critical that we pass this piece of legislation to ensure that we're able to meet our retention and recruitment goals. What influence, if any, do you think that, awareness of this lack of ability to pay is factoring in? And if not, and we're surprising individuals walking into this, do you think there's more that we should be doing to let them know if, my colleagues are not willing to take this bill up and to pass it into law?
Well, first, we thank you both for your support of that bill and for our Coast Guard members. I should mention, this is a total workforce issue because our civilian employees are critical to our operations as well, and in case of a lapse of appropriations, we often have to send them home. I cannot quantify the impact of the potential pay lapse on our ability to recruit and retain folks, but certainly knowing that is off the table is a great message to send.
Great. So do you think it's fair to say that, yes, we should be paying our Coast Guard men and women in the event of a government shutdown?
Well, as I said, we cannot afford to break faith with our workforce, and that certainly is one way to do that.
Yeah. As we experience increased cuts, we are seeing a 22% cut for federal government funding with these, in the lapse of appropriations, and it is just critical that we're continuing to pay these Coast Guard men and women. In the remaining time, if you have any comments on ensuring safe and stable and affordable housing for our Coast Guard men and women, we know that is another critical issue.
It is, and as I said, we're different than the other services because most of our force is on the economy, not in government housing. So we really need to look at how BAH rates are set, and we need to look at how we can make them more adaptable quickly to market conditions.
Thank you. I'm over time, so yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mast, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Semper Paratus, Admiral.
Right back at you, Congressman.
Very good. Hey, when I first walked in, you were finishing up a statement saying, following the other services. So I'm going to get into transgender policy and ask you very specifically, at the direction of the Department of Homeland Security or at the direction of the Department of Defense, is the Coast Guard in any way following the direction of other services or one of our service secretaries to do things other services has done, allegedly support recruitment and retention by planning drag queen story hours on air bases as a following the other services, hiring influencers that are drag queens or transgender to specifically boost or have a program to specifically recruit transgender individuals. Does that exist in the Coast Guard?
Not to my knowledge, Congressman. We follow the other services with regard to our policies around transgender members. I'm not aware of any specific recruiting efforts that are targeting that community.
Thank you. I couldn't find any, so I wanted to ask you outright if such a thing existed. Going specifically to the policies, I'm reading a number of different policies dated different times over the years by the Coast Guard. Is it still the policy of the United States Coast Guard that individuals with a history of gender dysphoria will be permitted to join the military if they are only stable for 18 consecutive months in their biological sex prior to accession as certified by a licensed medical professional? Is that still the policy of the United States Coast Guard?
I'd have to take that for the record to make sure that 18 months is exactly the number, but generally, we do have a policy that allows stable members with gender dysphoria diagnosis to enter our service, consistent with the other services.
Acknowledging that you don't know the exact month number, I know reading numerous documents, it was hard for me to find as well whether it's 36 or 18 or if there had been a change. So conceding that there's confusion about the exact date, why does it exist that individuals have to be stabilized in their biological sex before allowing to assess into the Coast Guard?
Well, I think what all the services are doing is just like any other medical condition. We want to make sure that we know what we're getting and that we have somebody who is stable and therefore they will be able to serve, similar to many other medical conditions.
Can you describe the medical condition?
Excuse me?
Describe to me this medical condition.
Any other medical condition? Or?
This condition, gender dysphoria. Individuals that need to be stabilized in their biological sex for 18 months or something close to that in order to receive a session into the Coast Guard. Other policies in there have not transitioned to their preferred gender, and a licensed medical provider has determined that gender transition is not required to protect their quote-unquote health, and willing and able to adhere to all standards associated with their biological sex, other things listed out there. Can you just help me understand what is the medical condition of gender dysphoria?
Sir, Congressman, I'm not a medical professional. I can certainly provide or offer a brief with our chief medical officer, and she could probably do a much better job than I in answering that question.
But I'm going to say this, based upon the Coast Guard's guidance, and I agree with it, it does appear that they acknowledge that there are medical conditions associated with individuals identifying outside of their biological sex. And I think that's a very real issue. I think it's absolutely affecting retention in all of our branches of the military. I think for the branches that are specifically looking to recruit individuals that are transgender, they're losing more than they are recruiting, and I don't think it is a focus to make the fighting force that much better. But I want to move to one other quick Coast Guard document here. Coast Guard Human Resources document. It's the last question on this, and I'll submit it for the record in case you want to see it. But here's the question. This is from a Coast Guard document. This isn't my question. Isn't focusing on diversity issues creating reverse discrimination and separating us further rather than uniting us? This is a United States Coast Guard Human Resources document, and I will just say this. The answer was an absolute non-answer, so I would ask, Admiral, could you answer that question from a Coast Guard document? Isn't focusing on diversity issues creating reverse discrimination and separating us rather than unifying us?
I'm happy to answer that question. I don't know the context of that paper. What I can tell you as a military leader of 38 years.
I'll submit it for the record.
In a service that relies on small teams at the tactical edge to get the mission done, there's no question diverse teams are more effective, and every single member needs to feel included, or else they will not be as effective as they need to be. So I do not agree that focusing on diversity causes reverse discrimination.
I would recommend you take a look at this document, and you all look to update it, because, like I said, very much a non-answer. I don't have time to go into it, but very much a non-answer given to a very important question.
That was a very
Thank you.
direct answer. He answered your question.
That they updated on here. It's a very non-answer. But
the Admiral.
Let's pause 1 second. I haven't yielded you any time. But as I said, a very non-answer on the document. The document here, which I will submit for the record. Representative Garamendi, would you want to read it? I don't think you've read it yet.
Pass it down.
I'll pass it on down. There you go. You can read it for the non-answer for yourself.
I'll take a look as well afterwards.
Representative Gonzalez-Colon, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for coming today. Dr. Ash, I'll have some questions for you. The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, ASVAB, is being used by every service, including the Coast Guard, to assess an individual's develop abilities and determine appropriate occupational matches in the military for enlisted personnel. For such a vital component of the selection and recruiting process, for me it's surprising that hasn't undergone any comprehensive evaluations in the 1990s. We were talking about 30 years having the same ASVAB. What recommendations do you have for updating the ASVAB, and how will this help with increasing access to the service?
Thank you for that question. So as you indicated, the AFQT, which is 4 of the ASVAB is like 13 tests. The AFQT is the part that is used to judge quality of recruits. The ASVAB scores are used for occupation, so just to make that distinction. So the AFQT score reflects their standing relative to the national population. It's based, currently normed, that relative population is based on a survey from 1997, and so it's quite old. We don't know how test scores for the target population has changed. What we do know is for school children, 4th and 8th graders from the...
Do you recommend having any updating on that
Yeah, so
exam? Okay.
it's...
That was the question.
apologize. So, yeah, I'm sorry. So, yes, it should be updated. We don't know what updating will do because we don't know what has happened to test scores, but based on a younger population, we know test scores has declined. And so what that will mean, if it has declined relative to 97, young people would have higher score. Right now, they look like they have low scores, but all young people have low scores. If we renorm, we'd have more people who could qualify.
Thank you, Dr. There's also waiver policies created a perception that we are lowering our standards and ultimately creating a substandard military force. For instance, recently there has been a rise in waivers granted for marijuana use, misdemeanors, and certain medical conditions such as anxiety disorders, depression across the services due to their increased prevalence among today's youth. Based on your research, what impact do such waivers have on military performance and readiness?
So we did an extensive analysis for the Army on waivers. Army, over the period we studied, was about 15% were getting waivers. What we found was that waivered recruits were not uniformly risky across all the performance dimensions we looked at. Among the ones where they might have had issues, they did have issues, it was related to what the waiver was. So if it was a waiver for drugs, if they separated, it was likely because of drugs. That said, what we also found was that it was possible to offset some of those performance risks by changing the characteristics. So, for example, if an individual had a higher likelihood of separating because of their waiver, bringing in a kid who was a high school diploma graduate or older, these are people who tend to have a lower probability of leaving, could offset it. Bottom line,
Doctor, what's the impact? What's the impact of those waivers in the performance?
So the impact of the waivers was that it was not necessarily negative and often positive, and that even where it was negative, there were ways to offset that.
In the readiness, same thing?
Yeah, these were at readiness, to the extent we can measure readiness.
There's a whole list of articles attempting to explain the reduction in recruiting numbers in recent years experienced by all branches of the military. Young Americans born between 1997 and 2012, also known as Generation Z, for many reasons known and unknown, are simply not interested in serving on our military. Can you expound on Generation Z culture and discuss a few of the main factors contributing to this generation apprehension with joining the service, and where best will you recommend the Coast Guard target its resources to attract these young men and women to our organization?
So my testimony dealt the second question, so let me speak to the first. The evidence on whether Gen Z or, what is fundamentally different than previous ones is still unclear in the academic literature. So let me just start with that. The point being that even other generations faced with the tight economy we're seeing might be having the same attitude. So it's not clear it's specific to this generation, part one. Part two is that when we look at why people don't join, the kind of things they say in surveys have to do with the risks, like women often mention sexual assault, other kind of PTSD, the military lifestyle, interfering with their plans, and just disliking the military lifestyle, but also the economy, having good external opportunities.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Vandrew, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, everybody. It's always good to see the Coast Guard. Wonderful evening the other evening at the gala in Cape May. It's good to see you again, Admiral. Beside me in this crowded room, we're going to do it somehow, is a photo of a 240-foot-long cargo vessel. It collided with an offshore wind structure in Europe's North Sea. The ship's hull was shredded from top to bottom, and the ship was nearly sheared in half. I've spent my time on this particular committee highlighting the dangers of offshore wind to maritime navigation safety. That's why, and this is why I did so. This is just one example. Administrator Phillips, you once described safety as your, quote, North Star. Do you believe that a vessel colliding with an offshore wind structure is safe?
I do not believe that, sir.
Okay, thank you. It is unbelievable that this administration is forcing these projects through despite what many believe are the dangers. And in fact, interestingly enough, today, there was a Fairleigh Dickinson University poll in the state of New Jersey that showed not just South Jersey, where these things are going to really affect the particular state of New Jersey, not just Florida, not just certain areas, but along the entire state, that the majority of people did not want to see them. It just came out today. I don't know if you saw it. I'm concerned that we're ignoring the fundamental safety principles for political experience. Administrator Phillips, have you been a vocal advocate of the offshore wind industry in your official capacity as a maritime administrator?
Sir, thank you for that question. My mission and my obligation as the maritime administrator is to foster, promote, and develop the maritime industry of the United States.
Okay, so, and in your mind, and I guess their mind, to be fair, that would be also being a vocal advocate of the offshore wind industry.
I advocate for all aspects of the maritime industry within this country, sir.
Okay, including the wind industry, no more or less, you would say?
We support the wind industry through our Port Infrastructure Development Program and through our Title 11 loan program, which provides loans to shipyards to build vessels in support of the offshore wind industry and other aspects of the maritime industry.
So you loan money to them so that they can build these vessels, is that correct?
It is correct.
Thank you. When you last appeared before this committee, I asked you about your work for the consulting firm Birdshaw Associates. You stated that you, quote, did work for Birdshaw probably more than a decade ago. Actually, in fact, you worked for Birdshaw Associates a little more recently, up to 2018. More recently, that was more recent than you described in your previous testimony, but nevertheless, Birdshaw Associates, your former employer, who you used to work for, was active in the wind energy space while you were there. Is that correct?
I am not aware of that, sir. My work with Birdshaw, which actually ended in 2016, as far as any work I did for them, was all on the Department of Defense side.
Okay, well, I thank you for that answer. We have information that we will get to you that states 2018 you were still related to them, and they were active in the wind energy space while you were there. Birdshaw maintains staff with expertise in wind energy, as we all know. One of your colleagues at Birdshaw was a Mr. William Fetzer, whose LinkedIn profile describes his work as involving, quote, international wind farms, wind turbine manufacturers, and wind service industries, end quote. Would you say that that's an accurate quote? It's quoted right from the information.
This gentleman, sir.
Okay, well, we will get you a lot of information. Which is hard because you were all working together, but in any event, I guess things can happen. Birdshaw Associates also has a client named Apex Clean Energy. Apex is based in Virginia and operates in both onshore and offshore wind development. In 2018, after leaving Birdshaw, you began working as a special assistant to Governor Northam of the state of Virginia. Is that correct, ma'am?
I did work for Governor Northam starting in 2018, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. In October 2019, Governor Northam and Apex Clean Energy announced a power purchasing agreement for Virginia's first onshore wind farm. Is that correct, ma'am?
I don't know, sir. I have no knowledge of that activity.
Okay. In 2021, Governor Northam announced a major deal with a manufacturer named Siemens to construct an offshore wind manufacturing facility. It turns out that Siemens is also a client of Birdshaw Associates, your former employer. Incidentally, Siemens is also the company who manufactured the turbine that resulting in the devastated collision that you now see in this picture. Administrator Phillips, the past decade of your career is surrounded by businesses and individuals involved in wind energy development in the United States of America. I personally believe you've used your office to promote offshore wind, including testifying before Congress to request millions of dollars in public funding that would, quote, advance offshore wind farm development. I feel that your willingness and expertise in advocating for wind energy development is possibly a reason why this administration has selected you as administrator. How do you feel about that? And I'm done, I heard.
Okay, well,
Can she finish her answer?
she can in the second round.
Okay, thank you. That's an ugly picture, you can take it down.
More questions.
I don't want them staring at that.
Mr. Carbajal, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I will try to do my best to be Perry Mason as well. Ms. McLeod and Admiral Thomas, can you please explain Coast Guard retention rates for women and minorities over time, and what is the Coast Guard doing to ensure that its leaders better reflect America?
Yeah, no, I was just about to.
Congressman, happy to answer that question because it obviously is important to us, and our commandant has made it very clear that we need to look different in the future. So we are focused on developing robust candidate pools that represent, the mix of our nation. With regard to retention, particularly retention of women in our service, has actually the gap between the retention of women and men in the service has tightened. And URMs, we recently did an underrepresented minority study, which gave us several recommendations on how to improve retention. Some of that has to do with our military justice system, which we've adjusted. Some of it has to do with building tighter communities, particularly communities where URM seem to want to serve, and we're doing that as well. So there's a lot of activity in that space, particularly around retaining women and URM.
Thank you. Ms. McLeod?
Yes, so we have studied female active duty personnel in the services and have found that female service members are 28% more likely to leave military service than male service members. And some of the reasons we found are related to work schedules, organizational culture, family planning issues, sexual assault, and dependent care. So again, that's military service-wide and the Coast Guard being one.
Thank you. Admiral Thomas, a GAO report highlights 29 recommendations, as you mentioned, to address recruiting, of which 24 the Coast Guard has not taken action on. Many of these recommendations include suggestions to utilize metrics and benchmarks, which are important to track progress and understand how strategies work. If you can't measure it, you can't evaluate it. Admiral Thomas, what metrics are the Coast Guard using to track recruitment progress? How does the Coast Guard measure its recruiting efforts, and what have these measurements shown?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. There's absolutely no question that our IT systems around HR, around our workforce, we need to invest because the current systems we have are built for a workforce that is monolithic, and that is not where we are anymore. We need to have a deeper understanding of our workforce down to the individual level so that we can manage them and help them better. That absolutely includes our recruiting numbers as well. I mentioned earlier the new technology we're bringing on for our recruiters is called Gangway. That will allow us to have metrics. It will allow us to measure every step of the process. We'll know how many people fall off at what point, and then we'll be able to make some adjustments. Right now, that is very difficult for us to do. It's a valid recommendation from the GAO, and we are investing in order to get after it.
And what's the time frame for the implementation of that?
We will implement Gangway in the first week of June.
Thank you. Ms. McLeod, what sort of metrics should the Coast Guard utilize, and do you care to comment on the strategies Admiral Thomas mentioned?
Yeah, I think that we will be looking at the strategies that the Admiral mentioned and comparing those against best practices in our work. But in terms of our prior recommendations, many of these studies that we've discussed today are fairly recent. We have seen some Coast Guard action on establishing some of the metrics, strategies, and timelines going forward. We would like to see them move out a little quicker on those recommendations. In particular, one of our foundational recommendations in terms of Coast Guard workforce is related to its assessing its own workforce. At the time of our report a couple of years ago, the Coast Guard had assessed only 6% of its units and workforce needs, and now we've seen that increase to 15%, but we still think there would be some benefit to the Coast Guard taking a broader look across its workforce needs, across its units in order to establish the workforce that it needs going forward. And we're awaiting response from the Coast Guard on how it's going to respond to that recommendation in terms of timelines when they anticipate being able to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Okay, we'll now begin our second round of questions, starting with myself. Recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mrs. McLeod, GOA recently released a snapshot of active duty recruitment and retention challenges in the military. The report primarily focused on the challenges faced by the Department of Defense. Do you believe the same concerns identified in your study apply to the Coast Guard, and can you pledge, or could you please highlight a few of the most concerning challenges from this report?
Yes, I certainly, we haven't done this work specific to the Coast Guard in every case, although some of these studies that are included in the snapshot do include Coast Guard personnel. I think service-wide, we are seeing these challenges. One that I'll point out is that only about 1 in 4 people, according to DOD, 1 in 4 people in the United States between the age of 17 and 24 are able to meet the recruitment requirements for military service, which include, for example, education and physical fitness requirements.
Dr. Ash, there is a whole host of articles attempting to explain the weak recruiting numbers in recent years experienced by all the branches of the military, especially in the younger generation Americans call Gen Z. Can you discuss a few of the main factors contributing to the generations of apprehension in serving the military, and give your recommendation on how the Coast Guard can focus resources to recruit these young men and women?
I'll follow what I had said before, which is some of the factors that come up in surveys have to do with risk to physical, being and risk of death. Often gets mentioned, risk related to sexual assault and sexual harassment. People mentioned problems with leaving family and friends, other career interests, pursuing, the role of the civilian economy. In terms of what the Coast Guard can do, it needs in the short term to focus on increasing recruiters and advertising in an effective way. By that I mean it's not just increasing recruiters, but selecting them well, training them well, deploying them well, and motivating them to produce. Having effective advertising messages. I also believe there's more that can be done in the waiver and eligibility space. I will say that while it's true that about a quarter are eligible to enlist, it's also the case that low eligibility has been persistent for many years, and so it's hard to see that as the driving force of current difficulties.
Thank you very much. I will yield back the balance of my time. Mr. Carbajal, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Phillips, in recent years, the U.S. Merchant Marine has been reckoning with incidents of sexual assault and sexual harassment, which have no doubt harmed recruitment. I'm glad to see that under the direction of Congress, the Maritime Administration is enforcing compliance with sexual assault and harassment policies for cadets' Sea-Year training program. We have a long way to go to create a safe, supportive work environment What is your plan for promoting a safe culture across the U.S. Merchant Marine?
Congressman, thank you for that question. And we certainly thank this committee for their assistance in supporting us as we endeavor to change the culture broadly across the maritime industry, and in particular in your support of the Embark program and what it is doing to ensure our safety of our cadets at sea, and by ensuring our safety of cadets at sea, the safety of all mariners at sea. So as you're aware, we're very much focused on the Embark program. It is now law. All 16 of our operators and carriers are in the program. We are moving forward in that context to create a rule this year, which we have been tasked by law to do. In addition to that, as you're aware, we've strengthened sexual assault prevention and response capacity and capability at the Academy in particular, hiring a staff of experienced professionals to ensure that midshipmen have the safety that they need there and the requirement and the capacity to support their needs on site at the Academy. We've also ensured that midshipmen sail with voice-activated phones so they can contact anyone they care to in the context while they are at sea. We have enforced concurrent jurisdiction now. We've entered into a concurrent jurisdiction at the Academy so that when or should an unfortunate circumstance occur where there is some sort of criminal activity, the local police, Nassau County, Kings Point Police can respond, which was not true in the past. So all of these things serve collectively to strengthen support for midshipmen, all midshipmen at the Merchant Marine Academy, and broadly through the Embark program, support them at sea and also support mariners at sea in expanding safety such that they are valued for their professionalism and skill, and they can serve with confidence that that any activity that should take place that would be a detriment to their service can be handled through us and through the Coast Guard, who has law enforcement authority.
Thank you, Admiral Phillips. And let me just say how much I value your leadership and all that you're doing. When you consider the credentials you bring to the table, I'm really in awe of your leadership and your capability and all that you're doing to address these very important issues. So thank you very much. Admiral Thomas, access to quality health care is a critical factor in recruiting and retaining service members. GAO report stated that the Coast Guard's clinics reported difficulty recruiting and retaining health care providers, particularly in remote areas. 25% of the Coast Guard's clinics surveyed were located in a geographic health provider shortage area. What is the Coast Guard doing to better recruit and retain health and mental health care providers so that the Coasties can receive adequate medical care? Not just the Coasties, but their families. I've been to some remote areas where Coasties and their families have had many challenges making appointments and seeking the care that they deserve and want. If you could touch on that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Thank you for visiting all of our Coast Guard men and women. I know you've been out there, and it makes an impression. So access to health care is a challenge across this nation for everyone. It's an acute challenge for the Coast Guard when we're in those remote areas. We have, in the past, relied on DOD military treatment facilities and public health service doctors. We're going to continue to do that, but we've realized we need to build our organic capacity. So we are right now hiring dentists and doctors into the Coast Guard. We're in a Coast Guard uniform. We haven't done that before. We're going to need some help from Congress to get some authorities to treat them differently in our workforce. You'll see that, and I don't think that will be a problem. We're building behavioral health technicians from our corpsmen. We put more mental health professionals out there. We have mobile medical units that we will now move to places where we know we have medical, but there's a lot more work to be done. But there is, for the first time in the history of the Coast Guard, a pathway from our boot camp in Cape May to med school and then to serve as a doctor or dentist in the Coast Guard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm going to yield 5 minutes to myself. Just the thought I have, too, you all have such a great history in the Coast Guard, a strong military history, a history of strength, and I personally think that that's part of the concern of some of these young people. The type of people that enlist in any of the services are people that very much believe in America and a strong America. And I think it's good. In fact, interestingly enough, if you look at the stats, the Marines were also down, but are down the least. And I think part of it is that kind of feeling that they put out there about this is America, the greatest country on the face of the earth, and we are going to be a strong unit. We're so concerned with so many issues other than the military issues. I think at times, in my humble opinion, that actually can hurt us. Anyhow, I wanted to leave off, Administrator, with you where we were before, and just ask you a few more questions. Have you ever spoken with any of the following individuals or organizations about wind energy development? And I won't go fast. Mr. William Fetzer of Birdshaw.
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay, not even shaking hands or casual conversation?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay, thank you. Apex Clean Energy,
Not to my knowledge.
because they were all working in the same areas you were. That's the only reason I ask.
I did not work offshore wind.
Siemens or Siemens Gamesa.
Not to my knowledge.
Liz Klein of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management.
I speak to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management on occasion. I cannot single out a specific individual, sir.
Okay, you don't know them by name. Okay. Has promoting wind energy benefited your career, do you think, at all?
Sir, I have promoted wind energy as the Maritime Administrator in the context of promoting the maritime industry's contribution to that industry.
And has the administration instructed you in any way to promote wind energy, that would be a good thing, because they're very, very strong supporters of it?
Again, in the context of my role as the Maritime Administrator, I promote the maritime industry.
Okay. Have you been instructed by the administration to not talk about any of the negative impacts of wind energy or offshore wind?
I have not been instructed by the administration to talk about anything in particular. I talk about the wind industry in the context of promoting the maritime industry.
Do you believe there's a possibility that offshore wind structures, because I have spoken to people in the Coast Guard offline, many, who have real concerns with this, in the United States of America will make maritime navigation less safe?
Sir, I would defer on navigation measures to the Coast Guard, who regulates navigation and safety at sea.
Okay, so you have no particular thoughts on that?
I would defer regulatory navigation matters to the Coast Guard, who oversees them.
Okay. I will yield to, who's next? Mr. Garamonde. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This committee has historically been a committee that focused on really critical issues. We've heard today a divergence from that. And I had hoped that Mr. Babbitt and Mr. Mass would have stayed around or had asked Admiral Phillips the question that our ranking member asked you, so that they could have heard your answer on the critical issue of how we deal with the sexual assault, misogyny, and other problems that do exist in the maritime industry. Unfortunately, they were not here to hear your response. I thank you for your response. I thank you for attacking this issue directly and appropriately. Mr. Van Drew, I understand why you would find offshore wind to be a problem, given your district and the impact that it may have on your district. But I think it inappropriate to single out a specific individual as being the reason why, or trying to find out if the reason why there is support for the offshore wind industry. Going after Admiral Phillips in such a manner as you have done, I believe to be inappropriate. Your opposition to offshore wind is your choice, and you should, in my view, do anything you can on the policy side of it rather than on the personal side. Admiral Phillips has an extraordinary record of service to this nation. She is an appointee of the President, and she is carrying out the policy of the administration. It is inappropriate to go after her history and background to try to somehow impugn her integrity. Now,
Mr. Garamondi, would you yield a few moments?
As acting chair of this committee, you can take this issue on when I finish my time, which is 2 minutes and 16 seconds from now. So no, I will not yield. Now, to address the question of policy, you might have asked Ms. Phillips, of Admiral Phillips, how she is carrying out the administration's policy, but you chose instead to go at her background and her integrity. This committee has not done that in the 13 years that I have been involved in this committee. And I would hope that we would not make that a common practice, although we've heard it 3 times today, 3 times, from 3 different members of the committee. So, there are profoundly important issues, one of which you raised, Mr. Van Drew, and that is the issue of navigation. It is an important issue. You know, where are these towers going to be built? Do they somehow, are they going to be placed in places where there is a navigation issue? It's a profoundly important issue. That line of questioning to Admiral Thomas may have yielded a useful data point for this committee's work. We have profound issues, and we ought to be getting to those, many of which were raised by members of the committee, Democrat and Republican alike. So I'm going to let it go at that, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Garamondi. I am going to yield myself 5 additional minutes as acting chair. I don't know where to begin. Number one, I didn't attack you personally, nor would I. That's about as gentlemanly as I can be. I'm pretty rough in committee, as you know. I say what I feel, and I say what I believe is right. And there's no attempt to hurt you or anybody else, but I think it's important in this process that we connect all the dots. This is a big deal. This is a really big deal. We are going to have millions of acres of our ocean and thousands upon thousands of wind turbines that are going to affect the environment, that are going to affect the floor of the sea, that are going to affect people's jobs, whether they're in the real estate energy, because even the companies themselves, some of which I mentioned, have openly said that it's going to reduce the revenues that come into our area. We're a very heavily tourist area by about $1 billion. And they said they didn't think that was a really big deal. It's going to affect us in ways that we can't even imagine yet. Imagine thousands eventually of these windmills over 1,000 feet tall that make a considerable amount of noise, that have killed birds. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of the bald eagles that have actually been sucked into the wind that's been created by this. And the energy that we're going to net is not going to be that great. And it is also one of the safety and the security of the United States of America. Our energy is going to be controlled not by America. This energy is going to be controlled by foreign countries. So this affects the Coast Guard. It affects the military. It affects the economic sector. And I've got to be honest with you, Mr. Garamondi, when I believe in something, and when I believe that I'm doing the right thing, usually I will be like a pit bull when I'm up here. And you've seen that, man. No, you wouldn't yield to me right now. I'm not going to yield to you. So the truth is that this is Jeff Van Drew light, to be honest with you. And I also will tell you, there's probably nobody that has greater respect and love for the Coast Guard. We've brought in millions of dollars. We're doing a lot of work over there, and we're going to bring in more, particularly into Cape May, because we want to make sure that these barracks are updated, and we're going to continue the process to do that and advocate for that and fight for that and stand up for that. But when I think something that is being done that is very wrong and very harmful, I will go down every avenue, every street, every direction I can take to find out. And boy, if that's being hard on somebody individually, be honest with you, to give you credit, I think you're a whole lot tougher than that, to be honest with you. You are in the military, and I think you're a lot tougher than that. I didn't say anything negative about your personality. So I appreciate the Coast Guard. I appreciate what you do, but I also appreciate we have to find out every single fact, every iota of information that we can. Mr. Garamondi, I will yield to you.
Mr. Carbajal. If I might, sir, thank
And then
you.
Mr. Carbajal, is that okay?
Thank you so much for yielding. In your comments, you went through a litany of very, very important issues pertaining to wind energy. All of those, from bald eagles to navigation. Those are pertinent issues. And yes, you should, and we should, address those issues. My concern is that you were going after the Admiral's background and veracity, and in your line of questionings, which had little or nothing to do with the profoundly important issues that you just listed. And I would hope that you would pursue all of those issues without pursuing the integrity of the witnesses.
I'm going to reclaim my time again. I never, ever questioned anybody's integrity. I asked simple questions, which we are certainly allowed to do and encouraged to do, and respectfully, I disagree with you. Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm going to give you Representative Salud Carbajal Marine Light as well. I'm trying to make a point, and so I wanted to ask you one question. Do you believe oil production is more environmentally friendly than offshore wind?
I believe that currently offshore wind, in this aggressive way that we're going about it, is really forming a great danger to the coast, the coast of New Jersey, but not only New Jersey, actually to Florida. You can see of both parties, a lot of the Floridians who represent Florida and actually the coast, the east coast of the United States.
I'll reclaim my time, Mr. Van Drew. Let me just say that I am informed that you've been very supportive of the oil industry.
Well, you're informed incorrectly. In
Well,
fact,
I reclaim my
I'm
time.
going to reclaim my time.
But
I'm
as
sorry.
chair, I think I still have my time. Let me just finish. The reason I say that is that while I understand that you may not be a proponent of offshore wind energy, it's something that's being considered off my coast in my district. We're going through extensive environmental review and extensive public process, but there's trade-offs, and no doubt, even renewable energy is not devoid of impacts. But when you consider the impacts of alternative fossil fuels, it's much, much better. And you may not be a supporter of it, but it's something that we are considering in my district. And I only pipe up because I hear you really focusing on things that, when you compare it to alternatives, it's not necessarily accurate. So I only share that with you, and wanted to give you a little bit of salud light. And I will send you information about your position on oil and oil votes in the past. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
And let me answer that. I have actually stood on our beaches and have actually been part of those people who have opposed
putting any kind of oil rigs or any, including President Trump, who I consider a friend and work with, however, always disagreed with him, personally spoke to him about it. I think it's easy to throw something out when you disagree with me on this issue, and that's fine, that's America. But just to say that I've been a big, huge supporter of the oil industry. I've never received $1 in a donation from the oil industry, and I stood, again, with the people who were fighting oil, any kind of oil exploration off our coast, on the East Coast there, and would continue to do so. I think that is bad as well and would be harmful on our East Coast. But I think there's a lot more. Everybody's, because of, and again, forgive me for using this word, it's the only word that comes to my head, the wokeness of the issue. And we're all worried about let's face it, everybody in this room is concerned, am I being careful enough? Am I saying the right thing about so many issues? We all have to be so woke. I frankly don't worry about that. I do what I believe is right. And I believe in the Coast Guard and the work it does. I do not believe that these windmills are going to be good. And by the way, let me tell you, you want to know where the real problem is? And you know this. It's in India. It's in Russia. It's in China. China, we still consider a developing nation. They build a coal plant every week of every month. You want to know where the carbon footprint is coming from? It's not coming from natural gas. And that I will say openly, that's not our problem. And we are going to spend a lot of money, a lot of time, make ourselves more vulnerable, make ourselves weaker as a nation, have our energy controlled by other nations, hurt our economy, hurt the economy of the entire area, not just New Jersey, but the whole coastal area, and hurt our environment. You know how heartbreaking it was to see? We usually might have 1 or 2 whales that get beached. We've had about 26 of them so far, along with the dolphins. I have people that are concerned with this and supporting me that never voted for me in their life and probably still won't. But they're real concerned about what's going on with these whales. And they're real concerned about what's happening to our environment. This is the environmental issue of our time. We are saying that this is good for the environment. I don't believe it is, and I'm going to fight this fight. I'll probably lose. There's so much big money, so much power behind this, so many foreign countries involved with this. I understand that, but I respect both of your opinion. I disagree with you both. And if you want to say mean things about me, that's okay. I think you guys were tougher on me than I was on her. So and if there's any other, do we have anybody else, Mr.?
Seeking time.
Anybody seeking time? Okay. So want to thank you. I yield back. If there are any further questions, members of the committee who have not been recognized, we all have. Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank you sincerely. I'd like to thank all of you for the witnesses and for your testimony. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing without objection. So ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and for information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The committee is adjourned.